So here's the solutions to the Simplifying Algebraic Fractions worksheet. Whenever we're trying to simplify a fraction, there are two steps. We factorize and then we cancel out common factors. And this has always been true. Take, for instance, simplifying 4/10. If we factorize the 4, we get 2 times 2. If we factorize the 10, we get 5 times 2. I can see the common factors of 2 on top and bottom, and that means my solution is 2/5. This is probably not how you think about simplifying 4/10, but it's always been the way that we do it, and it's going to be the way that we do these questions over here. All the same rules about adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing fractions are still true even for algebraic fractions. And bearing that in mind, let's begin. So to simplify x squared minus 3x over x squared minus 9, I want to factorize top, which is nice and straightforward. This is x brackets x minus 3. And I want to factorize the bottom. Recognizing this is the difference of two squares, this is x plus 3 times x minus 3. I see that I've got a common factor of x minus 3 on the top and the bottom, so that's going to cancel out, leaving my solution as x over x plus 3. In the next problem, I'm asked to add two fractions. And just like numerical fractions, I cannot add fractions, algebraic fractions, if they don't have a common denominator. So I'm going to take the 3 over x minus 4, and I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 2x plus 5. I'm going to take my 2 over 2x plus 5 and multiply top and bottom by x minus 4. And we'll see as we do this that we've created a common denominator. This trick always works for numerical fractions as well. If I was adding together 2/5 and 4/7, I would simply multiply top and bottom of this fraction by 7, and then I'd multiply top and bottom of this fraction by 5. I would end up with a common denominator of 35, and I could continue working. So this is just the same thing with bigger stuff. When we add two fractions, we add the tops. The tops represent amounts, and the bottom represents what kind of thing we're dealing with. So I've got 3 times 2x plus 5, add 2 times x minus 4 over the bottom line. Bearing in mind that to simplify fractions, I factorize them, there is no way I ever want to multiply out that bottom line. But the top line, I do want to multiply out because I can collect terms and then potentially simplify the fraction further. The top of this fraction is going to give me 6x plus 2x, which is 8x. And it's going to give me 15 minus 8, which is plus 7. Looking at that 8x plus 7, I can see there's no way that thing is going to factorize, so I know I'm done. On to the next question. This time I'm subtracting two fractions. I've got to be careful here, because we need to be careful of the minus sign and what that's going to do when I'm collecting terms. But to start off with, it's doing the same thing that the other ones were doing. I'm going to take this fraction over here, and I'm going to multiply top and bottom by x plus 1. This fraction over here is going to have top and bottom multiplied by 3. That's going to create a common denominator so I can subtract the fractions. So here we go. I've got 2x minus 1 times x plus 1 over 3 times x plus 1 minus 2 times 3 is 6 over 3 times x plus 1. That's going to get me, if I start multiplying out these brackets a little earlier, 2x squared plus 2x minus x just becomes plus x. Minus 1 times 1 is minus 1. Minus 6 all over 3 times x plus 1. On the top I've now got 2x squared plus x minus 7 over 3 times x plus 1. So the question is, does this fraction simplify any further? In order to simplify a fraction, as always, I would need to factorize the top and bottom. The bottom's already factorized, so let's look at the top. If the top factorizes, I'm going to need to use this principle of go big, then go home. I would end up looking for two numbers that multiply to make 14 and subtract to make 1. And those numbers don't exist. It's only 2 and 7 that multiply to make 14, or of course 1 and 14. So I can look at that fraction, look at the top line and realize it doesn't factorize, so the fraction is as simple as it can get. Now, this next question is actually very easy because they have already factorized it for me. A very, very common mistake with questions like this is to think you have to do something, so you start multiplying out the brackets. Let's think for a second about how we would simplify 4x squared over x. We should realize that this x will cancel out with one of the x's represented by the x squared, and the answer will be 4x. This is exactly the same thing, except instead of an x, it's an x minus 6. So, the x minus 6 on the bottom will cancel with one of those from the top, and I'm getting 4 times x minus 6. Now, if you're not quite comfortable with that, let me just break it down a bit further. 4 times x minus 6 squared over x minus 6. That is 4 times x minus 6 times x minus 6 over x minus 6. There's my common factor, and there's what it simplifies to. If you want to multiply out the brackets, you can, but you should have the marks by the time you've done this. Let's move on now to the next problem. I've got to add these two fractions together. Once again, I need a common denominator, so by now it should be old news. I'm multiplying the first fraction by x minus 1, and then I will multiply the second fraction by 2x minus 5. This is going to result in x times x minus 1 on the top of the first fraction, and 3x plus 2 times 2x minus 5 on top of the second fraction. These get added together over the common denominator of 2x minus 5 times x minus 1. Again, if this fraction is going to simplify, it's going to simplify by factorizing later on, so I don't want to multiply out my bottom line. Well, the top line is a real mess, so I'm going to multiply that out in the hopes that it will simplify. So this thing is going to become x squared minus x plus 6x from the first multiplication, 6x squared from the first multiplication. I've then got minus 15x plus 4x makes minus 11x. And 2 times minus 5 is minus 10. Take your time and make sure that you're doing this correctly. And now I have some terms to collect together. 1x squared plus 6x squared, that is 7x squared. Minus x minus 11x is minus 12x. And then a minus 10 on the end. This is all over 2x minus 5 and x minus 1. If this thing is going to simplify, then I need to factorize the top line. I would need to go big, then go home, and that means I'd be multiplying my numbers to make 70 and subtracting them to make 12. Now, if I think about numbers that multiply to make 70, well, obviously there's 1 and 70, there's 2 and 35, no 3s, no 4s, there's 5 and 14, there's no 6s, there's 7 and 10, there's no 8s and there's no 9s, and that's all my pairs. None of those pairs subtract to make 12, so I know the top line doesn't factorize, and I'm finished. Another strategy here would be to use the quadratic formula, or if your calculator has a quadratic solving function, to see what the solutions to the top line equals 0 are. And if they turn out to be nice whole numbers and fractions, you know it factorizes, and if they turn out to be horrible decimals, then you know they don't. I'm going to do the rest of the solutions in the next video.